So this guy is in federal prison for stealing a burn victim's settlement. His name is Tom Girardi, from the Erin Brockovich case. A 19-year-old was burned by a PG&E pipeline. PG&E is the company Girardi beat. PG&E paid $53 million for what happened to him. Girardi said it was $7 million. And the family didn't find out for 6 years, because every single month, Tom Girardi had a reason. 6:11 in the evening, September 9th, 2010. Joe Ruigomez sat down in a house in San Bruno to watch the first game of the NFL season with his girlfriend. Her name was Jessica Morales. She was 20, and she wanted to be a fashion journalist. Under that street was a 30-inch steel gas transmission line. At 6:11, it let go. 8 people died. 58 were hurt. 38 homes were gone. It happened 2 miles from the end of a runway at San Francisco International. Joe and Jessica got out of the house, and then a second blast caught them both. Jessica did not survive. Her body was found in a neighbor's shed. Joe lived. Barely. He was burned over most of his body, and he described what came next himself. I was in a coma for 2 months. I was in the hospital for 6 months. I had over 30 surgeries. Jessica was buried on the 20th of September. Joe wasn't there. He was still in the coma. He didn't miss her funeral. He was never awake to know there had been one. By the time he woke up, his family had already made a decision for him. PG&E was going to have to pay for this. So the Ruigomez family needed a lawyer. And in California, if a utility company has just set fire to your kid, there is one name everybody gives you. You already know the name. What you probably don't know is what he cost that company the last time. Hinkley, California, 1996. PG&E had poisoned a whole town's groundwater with chromium. And you know this one because they made a movie about it. Erin Brockovich. Brockovich wasn't a lawyer. She was a file clerk who found the medical records and knocked on the doors. Her boss, Ed Masry, was the lawyer. And the case got so big that a second firm came in to try it alongside him. That was Tom Girardi. Together, they took $333 million off PG&E. At the time, the biggest settlement of its kind in American history. So the family hired Girardi's firm, Girardi Keese, downtown Los Angeles, the man who had already beaten this exact company. For 3 years, that felt like the only piece of luck this family had caught. Then, in 2013, it settled. And the number PG&E put on what happened to Joe was the one you already heard. $53 million. And Joe's own share of it, after the costs, after the firm took its quarter, just under $10 million. Girardi told him $5 million. The rest, he said, was coming. Spread out. Over the rest of Joe's life. Which is a convenient thing to promise a 19-year-old, because money that is always still coming never has to actually arrive. The family were shown the signature pages. Just the signature pages, not the document. Because who asks their own lawyer to prove it? And Joe's money, he told them, was sitting safe in an account, earning interest for him. Federal prosecutors would later put it in writing. There was no account. There was never an account. So Kathleen would call, and every month there was something. A tax problem, a bankruptcy, a judge who supposedly hadn't signed off yet, another debt that had to be paid first. And for years, the one he came back to was that he was waiting on the mediator. Joe told a jury about that one later. Then, in August 2014, his office emailed Joe's mother. It was, in his words, more prudent to pay Joseph on a monthly basis. And then he added that this was an agreement I had with the court when we settled the case. There was no such agreement. Not with that court. Not with any court. He invented a court order. He put a judge's authority behind a lie, in writing, to the mother of a kid who was still going in for surgeries. And the money that was supposed to pay for the next round of surgeries was already gone. So was the money for every round after that. By June 2019, Joe Ruigomez, the young man burned in the fire, and his family had been waiting almost 9 years. So they did something people almost never do to their own lawyer. They went on television. Their statement? It's been almost 9 years since that horrific day in San Bruno, and all I want is to conclude our dealings with Girardi so our family can try to put this behind us. By then, he'd had 30 separate procedures, and his family said he was counting on that money for the ones still ahead of him. The reporter took it to Tom Girardi, and about this case, about this family, Girardi's answer was that he had, quite honestly, did a spectacular job. A spectacular job. That is the phrase he chose. 9 years, 30 surgeries, Jessica Morales buried while Joe was still in a coma, and the money still wasn't there. In the end, it took a lawsuit. Think about that. They had to sue their own lawyer to get money that was already theirs, and they still didn't know the worst of it. They were not the only ones. He did it to a widow, too. Judy Selberg's husband died in a boating accident. Her case settled, and what she got was 2 payments, spaced out, just big enough to keep her quiet. The smallest number in this whole case belongs to Josefina Hernandez. She was hurt by a faulty medical device, and her case settled back in 2018. The money finally landed at Girardi's firm in May of 2020. Her case settled for $135,000. After the fees and the costs came out, what she was actually owed was about $56,000. She never saw a cent of it. Not one. $56,000 from a man who flew private. And then there is Erica Saldana. In 2015, her 1-year-old son was catastrophically hurt in a crash with a drunk driver. Girardi settled the family's case for $17.5 million. She told the jury her son fought for his life in that hospital. He died of his injuries. Years later, while she was still trying to get her money out of Tom Girardi. And prosecutors said those 4 were nowhere near the whole of it. His own clients, one after another, for 10 years. And after a plane came down, settlement money for the families sat in his firm's account for 8 months, after a federal judge had ordered it paid out. Lion Air Flight 610. The people waiting were widows and orphans in Indonesia. Which leaves the only question that matters. Where was all of it going? The federal government's answer was blunt. They said Girardi was being run like a Ponzi scheme. It works like this. A new client settles. That money comes in. It goes straight back out to the client he robbed last year. The one who's finally shouting loud enough to be a problem. And then the new one starts waiting. Judy Selberg's money paid for 2 exclusive country clubs. More than $25 million of client money went to his wife's entertainment company. So a widow paid his club dues, and a burn victim was still waiting on an account that never existed. It fell apart at the end of 2020. Creditors moved in. The firm collapsed. And in June 2022, the California Supreme Court ordered him disbarred. And the State Bar of California knew. Across roughly 40 years, they had taken more than 200 complaints about Tom Girardi. Not one of them ever cost him his license. 200. And it took until February 2023 for a federal grand jury in Los Angeles to finally indict him. And that is when Tom Girardi's defense became his own brain. His lawyers said he had dementia, that he couldn't understand the case against him, and couldn't help defend himself. The court took it seriously. 3 days of hearings, doctors on both sides, and both of the government's experts told the court the same thing. He was exaggerating. In January 2024, Judge Josephine Staten issued a sealed order. He was competent. The trial would go ahead. So that was the defense. Dementia. 10 years of telling clients whatever they needed to hear. And now he wanted the court to take his word for it. Again. The trial ran about 3 weeks in a Los Angeles federal courtroom in August 2024. And one by one, the clients sat down in front of that jury. And in front of him. Remember the mediator? Joe Ruigomez, the one who was burned in San Bruno, told that jury Girardi used that excuse on him for years. Then his mother Kathleen took the stand and told them the rest. Judy Selberg, the widow, who had been paid just enough, just often enough, to stop her asking. Josefina Hernandez, who had been waiting 4 years and had never seen a dollar of it. And Erica Saldana, whose 1-year-old didn't live long enough to see any of it. And then, on the last day, the defense called one final witness, Tom Girardi, 85 years old, the man whose lawyers had spent a year telling the court he couldn't follow what was happening, took the stand himself. He told that jury, every client got every penny that every client was supposed to get. Then he blamed the man who kept his books, his own chief financial officer, Christopher Kamen, who was, in Girardi's words, pretty clever in stealing millions of dollars. The dementia was apparently not so advanced that he couldn't name a suspect. The jury went out on the 26th of August. They came back the next morning. About 4 hours, all in. Guilty. All 4 counts of wire fraud. Now they only had to pick a day to sentence him. Sentencing was the 3rd of June, 2025. Prosecutors asked for 14 years. And it happened to be Tom Girardi's 86th birthday. 2 of his victims stood up and spoke to the court. One of them was Josefina Hernandez, the woman whose money never reached her. She said, "I never should have been a client." And then she said this, "The doors of Girardi Keese should have been closed long before I hired him." That is not a complaint about Tom Girardi. That is a complaint about every single person who let him keep working. Then Girardi spoke. He told Judge Staten that mistakes were made at his firm and that he hadn't stolen from anyone. And then he said, "I didn't get any money." And then, "I just tried to help people." 87 months. 7 years and 3 months at 86 years old. The court also ordered him to pay back just over $2.3 million, which is not what he took. Prosecutors put that at more than $15 million. The United States Attorney's Office put it plainly. This self-proclaimed champion of justice, they said, was nothing more than a thief and a liar. On the 17th of July, 2025, Tom Girardi surrendered to a federal detention center in Los Angeles. He was not the only one from that firm who went. Christopher Kamen, the chief financial officer Girardi blamed from the witness stand, pleaded guilty. Judge Staten described a web of deceit and manipulation. She gave him 121 months. That is 34 months more than his boss got. David Lira, a lawyer at the firm, and Tom Girardi's own son-in-law, pleaded guilty to criminal contempt over the plane crash money and was sentenced to 4 months. And it isn't over. Another lawyer from that firm, Keith Griffin, pleaded guilty in March. His sentencing is the last piece of this, still waiting to land. And afterwards, the State Bar of California had to go looking at itself. It hired outsiders to work out how a man like this had stayed licensed for 40 years. But none of that answers the question this all started with. So did Joe Ruigomez ever get his money? He sued. And in January 2020, in front of a mediator who used to be a partner at Girardi's own firm, Girardi agreed to pay the family $12 million. He paid $1 million. Then he stopped. In April 2020, a judge entered an $11 million judgment against him. The court filing that followed put it in 6 words. No amount on the judgment has been paid. Tom Girardi is appealing his conviction. As of now, the Ninth Circuit has not ruled. His lawyers are still arguing he was never competent to be tried at all. And when the judge refused to release him while that appeal runs, she wrote that the timing of his first claim of incompetency was suspect from its inception. Jessica Morales is still 20 years old. She always will be. And the boy who lived through it beside her spent the next 6 years being told his money was sitting safe in an account that never existed. Every one of these people came to Tom Girardi on the worst day of their life. That is the only reason any of them were ever in the room. He was the last thing standing between them and being cheated twice. So, Be careful who you trust. And take care of yourself. Everything you saw here comes from public court records and news reporting. The images are illustrations, not real footage. And all of it is true.